September 2021, Salt Lake City, Utah. We spent the last 2 days driving through Nebraska and then Wyoming and then finally the mountains of Utah to get to Hill Air Force Base. We stayed at the FAM camp on Hill Air Force Base. Not a bad place. Nice, level, concrete sites. The sites themselves may not be overly spacious, and the FAM camp is poorly marked. The only other problem is it's near a main road, so there's a little bit of road noise. But I'd still stay here again. The first morning after we arrived, we went out to explore, and of course, we started with coffee. The Daily Rise coffee shop was in Ogden, and that's just a few miles north of where we were staying. The coffee was good, and it was a convenient place for us to stop since we were trying to make our way up to Snowbasin Ski Resort. Yeah, I know, it's summer, so what's the point of going up to a ski resort in the summer? Well, there's a few. First of all, the ride up was nice, and we used to live here, so it was kind of a nostalgia tour for us. We haven't skied up here for 20-some years, and boy has the place changed. Back when we skied up here, this was the only ski lodge. And I know I said the place changed, but this place hasn't changed a bit. I'm pretty sure that's the same carpeting that I used to walk on 20 years ago. But what is new is the new ski complex that they built just a little way down the hill from the old place. The new complex is absolutely beautiful. And to say it's new, well, maybe that's not quite right. They built it for the Olympics, and that was over 20 years ago. But it was new to us, and that's why we came up here, to see what had changed, and also to see if there is any good hiking trails that we might want to explore later, and we found out that there most certainly were. So, the next day, we set off on our very first hike in Utah. This hike was up very close to Snowbasin, and it was the Icebox Canyon Loop. Now, we haven't done any hiking for going on almost 2 months, so we decided to start off slow. This hike was only 3 miles long, and it only gave us an elevation gain of 515 feet. That's not a bad start. The hike itself was absolutely great. Yes, there were some ups and downs, but none of them were really steep. There was also lots of flowers to look at, and the hike itself was just plain fun, not too strenuous. Now, we were hiking at about 5,500 feet above sea level, and this is September, and it's early in the morning, so it turned out to be a little colder than we expected. But by the time we finished up the hike, the temperature had climbed and we were again nice and warm. And so we finished our first hike in Utah up at 5,500 feet. And again, it was fun. We enjoyed the flowers, we didn't push ourselves, but tomorrow we're going to try to do something just a little bit more and see how that works out for us. So after hiking the Icebox Canyon yesterday, today we decided to hike the Grotto in Hornet Canyon. On paper, this hike was only 40 feet higher in elevation gain, but the thing is, all of that gain, all 590 or so feet, happened during the last half mile. This trail was a little sketchy in places. I mean, there were times when I wasn't actually sure we were on the trail. It seemed to us that we were just making our way through the woods trying to find this grotto. This trail often took us across some narrow ledges on some really steep slopes. Now, like I said, the last half to 2/3 of a mile was just a constant up. And I mean a really steep up. You know, I'm not going to lie to you, this was hard. And more than once we thought about just saying, well, we've come far enough, look at that beautiful view, We've accomplished something. Let's just turn around and go back. But the grotto was supposed to be beautiful, and it's like just a quarter of a mile. All we have to do is live for another quarter of a mile. But eventually we made it, and the climb was worth it, even though during this time of year, and given the drought, there wasn't a lot of water in the grotto coming down off of the cliffs. So after relaxing for a while to the sound of waterfalls and catching our breath, we finally turned around and started making our way back down the mountain. Going down these trails is less strenuous. You don't get nearly as tired, but it's a whole lot trickier. It's easier to slip and fall. And of course, it was much later in the day. So the sun was out in force and it was just a little bit warm, but again, not bad at all, and most of this trail was actually in the shade. So the hike down was really pleasant. Once we made it down the trail, we hopped in the car and headed back to the base because right next to the RV park, there was a car show. This was an annual car show held on Hill Air Force Base and sponsored by the base itself. It was a pretty good sized car show too, about 40 or 50 cars and tractors and such. Worth going to, a lot of neat stuff to actually look at. And with the end of the car show was also the end of the day, and we had this sunset. Now, it looks pretty, but keep in mind, that's smoke coming from fires burning in Reno, Nevada. The next day, bright and early, we hit the road again to continue our exploring. But today we decided not to do a hike since the one we took yesterday was a little rough. Today we started off with a drive up the Big Cottonwood Canyon to Solitude and Brighton, two ski resorts that are right up there at the end of the canyon. Boy, I remember driving this road. It is windy, it is narrow, and I primarily drove it in the winter when it was covered with snow. There's all sorts of places where there's avalanche warnings up and down this canyon. Oh yeah, and moose. But it sure is a nice drive all the way up to Solitude. The mountains are beautiful and I enjoyed seeing those ski slopes again, even if they were green. Now if you were to drive from Solitude to the Park City Ski Resort in the winter, it would take you about an hour. But we did it in about 15 minutes because we drove through the Guardsman Pass, which is impassable in the winter. And so, 15 minutes later, driving along a steep and windy road, we were in Park City. Park City is known for some of the best skiing in Utah. I don't know about that. I mean, the skiing is good, but there are other places that are just as good. But Park City has a really neat little town that's a lot of fun to explore. We took a nice walk up and down the main street of this little town. We started off with a coffee at Laniche because, you know, we like coffee. Janet sat down and made friends with some of the locals. And we ended the day at Park City with lunch and a beer at the No Name Bar right on Main Street. And since it was getting a little later in the afternoon and we had a bit of a drive home, we decided to take it the long way and decided to make a stop at the Echo Reservoir. The Echo Canyon Reservoir used to be a nice large lake with people boating and fishing on it. But man, the drought has had its effect. The water level now is so low that there's just not much happening on it anymore. The last stop before getting home was the Devil's Slide. Not much here, just a neat little roadside attraction that's worth a stop. But now we're home, And since the fires are still burning in Nevada, we're treated to another beautiful sunset. And so the next day again started with coffee because today we have a long drive ahead of us. Today's destination is the Golden Spike National Historic Park. This is Promontory Point, the place where the railroad tracks from the east connected with the railroad tracks from the west, finally creating a way to travel by train from the east coast all the way to the west coast. This is Engine 119 representing the Union Pacific Railroad. This engine traveled the 1,086 miles of newly laid track from Omaha, Nebraska to Promontory Point. Coming down in the other direction was the Jupiter representing the Central Pacific Railroad. The Jupiter started its trek in Sacramento and crossed 690 miles of newly laid track over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Both of these locomotives are nearly identical replicas to the actual locomotives that were here in the day. The original locomotives have long since been destroyed and scrapped. After looking at the locomotives and getting a brief history of the area, we took a drive out into the area around Promontory Point. It was all desert, and Janet and I have had enough of desert, so we headed on back to the Green Mountains near Salt Lake. The plan was to find a nice river and have lunch with a view, since we haven't really had a lunch with a view in a long time. But plans changed because we remembered the Shooting Star Saloon. The Shooting Star Saloon is in Huntsville, Utah, and it claims to have the best burgers of anywhere. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I will say that these burgers were really, really, really good. In fact, they were as good as we remembered from our last time here almost 20 years ago. Well, there would be no lunch with a view, but there would still be a view. We took a drive up to the Causey Reservoir and Skull Crack Canyon. I mean, really, how could you pass up going to a place called Skull Crack Canyon? And the canyon did not disappoint. Not only did it have a cool name, but it was really, really pretty. Unfortunately, like all the other reservoirs and lakes in Utah, this one was only half full as a result of the drought. So today has come to an end, and again it's time for us to go home, enjoy another smoke-filled sunset, and call it a day. The next day was a stay at home and get some work done day. I mean, we needed to do laundry. I needed to take the Jeep in for servicing, the cat needed to get groomed, and so did Janet. So that pretty well filled up the entire day. And that's the way the first week in Salt Lake City ended for us. It's good to be back because this is a really beautiful area, and it adds Utah to our list of states explored since we started RVing. So we still have a week here in Utah, and I certainly hope that you'll join us again at this stop. Oh, by the way, if you look at the description below, you'll find a link to every place that we stopped. Enjoy!